There's a letter. Not classified. Not in any archive. But it haunted Putin more than any CIA file ever could. Written in Dresden. Never opened. Never sent. And yet, it shaped how he ruled, how he trusted, how he feared. What was inside? Why did he seal it and never look back? Tonight, we dive into the most personal ghost in Putin's life. The one piece of paper no intelligence agency ever got their hands on. And by the end, you might understand why he never wanted you to see it, the ink that shouldn't have dried. There's an old man who walks the corridors of the Kremlin every morning at 6 a.m. He's not listed on any payroll, not in any security log, and he doesn't wear a badge. But he's always there. A former archivist, one of the last links to the Soviet system that once thrived in silence and shadows. And once, years ago, he told a story. A story about a letter. It wasn't supposed to exist. But it does. Handwritten. Unsent. And unlike anything Putin had ever committed to paper. The man said it was stored in an off-the-record vault, one of those legacy archives that doesn't officially exist, behind a door with no label, beneath a staircase no one uses. And it had been there since 1990. No stamp. No recipient name. No return address. Just 3 words, scrawled on the back of the envelope. For when it begins. The ink, he said, was slightly smudged. Like the writer hesitated. Like the truth wanted to stay hidden. December, 1990, Leningrad. Vladimir sat alone in the flat he hadn't called home in months. The walls were still lined with books from his university days. The air smelled of dust, ink, and old leather. The windows were shut tight, the heating barely working. He didn't notice the cold. On the desk before him, a thick sheet of writing paper. A gift from a former mentor. The kind no one used anymore, too luxurious, too permanent. He stared at it for nearly an hour. There were no drafts. There never were. He just began writing. Underscore if this letter reaches you, it means I failed. Or worse, that I've succeeded. Underscore. He paused. Underscore I used to believe in something. The system. The order. The quiet dignity of structure. But I also believed in people. In what they could be. And in you. Underscore. The room around him was silent. No ticking clock. No city noise. Just the scratch of pen on paper. Earlier that week, he had made a decision. Not official. Not announced. Just a decision. He was done pretending. The old order was collapsing. The Berlin Wall had fallen. Moscow, Dresden's last light. In the winter of 1989, the city of Dresden was a whisper. Streets silent before curfew, windows dim by choice, not necessity. People watched each other more than they watched TV. The wall had cracked in Berlin, but here, in this borderland of ideology and nerves, nothing had collapsed yet. Not publicly. Putin, then a mid-level KGB officer, wasn't stationed at a desk anymore. His job had shifted, informal, unspoken. He moved between apartments, bars, and offices, gathering whispers, sorting loyalty from panic. The kind of work that didn't appear in reports. One night, the call came. Not on a secure line. Not from Moscow. Just a local number. He answered. There was silence. Then a voice he hadn't heard in 3 years. You're still there. It wasn't a question. She knew he would be. Meet me. No time. No place. Just a tone. And he understood. He walked across a frozen tram line at midnight, hands in his coat, eyes scanning for watchers he knew wouldn't show. She had been careful once. Now she was reckless. Or desperate. They met near the river, behind an old printing warehouse. She lit a cigarette with hands that didn't shake. You still carry? He showed her the pistol. Then you're still pretending this isn't over. He said nothing. She handed him a folder. Not thick, not heavy. But the kind that weighed more than it looked. Underscore, you always asked what my red line was. I crossed it yesterday. Underscore. Inside the folder, transcripts, names, photos, some is, some not. People who had vanished. People who hadn't yet. Underscore, they're not building a new system. They're salvaging the old one, piece by piece. And you're one of those pieces. Underscore. He looked at her. No fear. Just calm rage. Underscore, so write it down, Volodya. All of it. Before they make you forget you ever wanted to. Underscore. Back at his flat, he sat at the desk. He didn't write that night. But he remembered. The shape of her eyes. The words she never said. The archivist's discovery. The archivist didn't expect to find anything remarkable that day. She had a routine: arrive early, drink bad coffee, sort through crumbling boxes marked unprocessed. Most of it was junk, forgotten orders, decommission reports, holiday cards sent to dead officers. She liked the silence, the dust, the sense that even the useless things had stories. But that day, she opened a box mislabeled Berlin Logistics. Inside was a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. No markings. No stamps. Just a faint scrawl on the flap. Only if it matters. No signature. No date. She almost sent it aside. But her curiosity, it was a curse. She broke the seal. The paper was stiff, brittle from time. A typewritten page, single-spaced, margins tight. But what stopped her wasn't the formatting. It was the first line. If this is being read, then I've either lost control or chosen not to return to it. Not standard language. She kept reading. The letter was a reflection, not a report. A man writing not for history, not for country, but for himself. They told me Dresden was an assignment. But it became a mirror. He described the city's decay. The faces of informants. The feeling of being watched by people who feared you, but didn't respect you. And in between the lines, the archivist saw something that chilled her more than any classified file. I began to understand that control is not maintained by loyalty. It's built on absence. Absence of choice, of memory, of alternative. She read the letter 3 times. It didn't name names. It didn't expose secrets. It exposed the man. A man fractured by what he had done, and what he had become. Underscore, I once believed in the idea of order. That people needed direction. But I've seen what happens when direction becomes silence. Underscore. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She just sat back. The silence in Dresden. In 1989, the walls weren't just falling in Berlin. They were crumbling inside him too. Putin had grown used to the stillness of Dresden. The predictability. The loneliness. His flat on Angelikastrasse was quiet, cold, and practical, just like him. But something had shifted. He felt it in the glances of his informants, in the silence of the phones that once rang without mercy, in the air itself. The GDR was cracking. And so was the illusion. He still reported in, still walked the same route to the villa that served as the KGB liaison office. But the reports were thinner. The directives, vaguer. Moscow had grown quiet, disturbingly quiet. And for the first time, he realized he was truly alone. The night it happened, he was writing a memo that no one would read. Not anymore. The door slammed open. 2 junior Stasi officers, pale, sweating. They're coming. The mob. They know. He didn't ask how. He already knew. The protesters weren't angry. They were desperate. Men with hollow eyes. Women gripping photographs. Kids too young to understand but old enough to remember this moment. Putin moved like muscle memory. Locked the files. Burned what he could. Hid the rest. He even wiped the nameplate off the door. And then he waited. There was no backup. Moscow wouldn't pick up. The local Stasi command had collapsed. The Soviet army garrison, 2 blocks away, refused to move without orders. "I am a Russian officer," he told the group outside, voice level but dead behind the eyes. "You are attacking Soviet territory." They didn't understand the words. But they understood the gun in his hand. No one crossed the gate that night. But something did break. Inside him. Afterwards, he sat in the basement of the compound, lights off, surrounded by ash and shredded paper. He lit a cigarette. Watched the one thing he couldn't control. By the time he sat behind the Kremlin desk, the letter was already ancient. Folded, faded, but still intact. He hadn't read it since Dresden. Hadn't needed to. Just knowing it existed had been enough. But in 2014, as Crimea changed maps and the West shifted from suspicion to fury, the weight of it returned. Not guilt. Not nostalgia. Just gravity. There were moments, brief and mostly private, when Putin would sit alone in his study. No advisors. No cameras. Just silence. Sometimes, he'd reach for the briefcase. Not the modern one. The old one. The Dresden one. And sometimes he'd run his thumb across the flap. Feel the raised ink of the words he had written decades ago. Only if it matters. The irony wasn't lost on him. Now, everything he did mattered. Every word. Every movement. Every silence. And still, the letter remained unopened. In 2018, someone came dangerously close. A journalist, young, Western, too bold for his own good, asked him, "What's the one thing you've never told anyone?" Putin smiled. Not the staged smile. The one that meant, careful. You assume there's only one. That night, he pulled out the envelope. He stared at it for a long time. Thought about burning it. Thought about finally reading it. Thought about nothing. In the end, he slid it back in. Some things stay closed for a reason. But the letter kept working, just in different forms. In how he sized people up. In how he tested loyalty. In how he responded not to action, but to inaction. It wasn't what people said. It was what they didn't. It was the silences. Like Dresden. In 2020, during a long, quiet winter in Novo Oboriovo, he was overheard telling an aide something strange. Sometimes, the loudest truths are whispered in silence. The letter may never be found. Its words may never be read. But the weight it left behind? That's real. If this story gave you a new lens on power and privacy, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who's always been curious. And most importantly, subscribe to Hidden Chapters. Because we're just getting started.